The morning sun barely broke through the thick London clouds when Kate Middleton stood at the grand window of Kensington Palace. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Outside, the world continued its usual rhythm, but inside these walls everything felt different. She had always known this day might come, yet nothing could have prepared her for the weight of it. William entered the room quietly, his footsteps soft against the polished floor. He had been up since dawn, making phone calls and arrangements that he wished he never had to make. When Kate turned to face him, he saw the redness around her eyes, the way she tried to maintain her composure even as her world crumbled. They had built a life together, raised their children with love and care, and faced countless challenges as a team. But this challenge was unlike any other. The news had come 3 weeks earlier during what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. William had been called into an urgent meeting with senior officials. When he returned home that evening, Kate knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. He sat her down in their private sitting room, took her hands in his, and explained the situation that would change everything. A critical diplomatic mission required his presence abroad for an extended period. It was not optional. It was his duty, his responsibility to the crown and country. Kate had listened in silence, her mind racing through 1,000 thoughts at once. How would they tell the children? How would they manage the separation? How could she possibly face the coming months without him by her side? But she was also a woman who understood duty and sacrifice. She had married into a life where personal desires often took a backseat to public responsibility. Still, understanding something intellectually and accepting it emotionally were two entirely different matters. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparations. William spent long hours in meetings being briefed on every detail of his mission. Kate threw herself into organizing the household, ensuring that everything would run smoothly in his absence. They tried to maintain normalcy for their children, but even the little ones sensed the tension in the air. George asked questions that were hard to answer. Charlotte clung to her father more than usual. Louis seemed confused by the hushed conversations and serious faces around him. Friends and family offered their support, but no one could truly understand the unique pressure that came with their position. Kate's mother visited often, providing both practical help and emotional comfort. She reminded Kate of her own strength, of all the times she had faced difficulties and emerged stronger. But this felt different. This was not about strength or weakness. This was about the profound pain of separation from the person who had become her anchor in a storm. The palace staff moved around them with practiced discretion, aware of the impending departure but respectful of the family's privacy. Mrs. Henderson, who had been with the household for years, made sure Kate's favorite flowers were always fresh in the rooms. The chef prepared meals that went largely uneaten. Even the security team seemed more subdued, their usual efficiency tinged with an unspoken sympathy. William and Kate stole moments together whenever they could. Late-night conversations in the garden, early morning walks before the children woke, quiet dinners after official duties were done. They talked about everything and nothing, trying to memorize the sound of each other's voices, the warmth of each other's presence. William promised to write every day, to call whenever possible. Kate promised to be strong, to keep their family together, to make him proud. But promises felt hollow in the face of such an uncertain future. The media, always hungry for stories about the royal couple, began to sense that something was happening. Reporters camped outside the palace gates, cameras ready to catch any glimpse of the family. Speculation ran wild in newspapers and on television. Palace officials released carefully worded statements that revealed little but confirmed enough to satisfy public curiosity without invading the family's privacy. Still, the pressure was relentless. Kate found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering how she would manage. She thought about all the public appearances she would have to make alone, all the decisions she would have to handle without William's input, all the lonely nights ahead. She thought about their children growing and changing while their father was away, missing milestones that could never be recaptured. The weight of it all felt crushing at times, but she also drew strength from unexpected places. Letters arrived from people across the country and around the world, sharing their own stories of separation and survival. Military spouses wrote about years apart from their loved ones. Immigrants spoke of leaving family behind to build new lives. Healthcare workers described the sacrifice of being away from home during crises. Each story reminded Kate that she was not alone in her pain, that countless others had faced similar challenges and found ways to endure. William struggled with his own demons. He knew his duty demanded this sacrifice, but that knowledge did nothing to ease the guilt he felt. Guilt for leaving Kate to shoulder so much responsibility alone. Guilt for missing time with his children that he could never get back. Guilt for the pain he could see in his wife's eyes no matter how bravely she smiled. He second-guessed the decision 100 times, even though he knew there was no real choice to make. They made plans for how they would stay connected. Video calls at set times when schedules allowed. Letters written by hand because there was something more personal, more permanent about words on paper. Care packages sent both ways filled with small reminders of home and love. They discussed how to help the children understand and cope, agreeing that honesty, adapted to their ages, was better than pretending everything was fine. The palace began to feel different in those final weeks. Every room held memories that suddenly seemed more precious. The breakfast nook where they shared morning coffee. The study where William worked while Kate read beside him. The nursery where they had rocked their babies to sleep. Even the grand halls that usually felt imposing now seemed intimate, witnesses to the private moments of their life together. Kate caught herself doing small things to memorize him. The way he laughed at something George said. How he absent-mindedly ran his fingers through his hair when he was thinking. The sound of his footsteps coming down the hallway. The warmth of his hand finding hers under the dinner table. She wanted to lock away every detail, to have something to hold on to during the long, empty days ahead. As the final day approached, both William and Kate felt time moving in strange ways. Hours seemed to disappear in minutes, while minutes stretched into eternities. They were caught between wanting the inevitable to be over with and desperately wishing it would never arrive. The children sensed the change before anyone spoke a word. George, being the eldest, had developed an intuition about adult conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. Charlotte became quieter, watching her parents with wide, worried eyes. Little Louis seemed to mirror the tension around him, becoming clingy and tearful without understanding why. Kate and William knew they could no longer delay the conversation they had been dreading. They chose a Sunday afternoon, a rare moment when the calendar was clear of obligations. The family gathered in the cozy sitting room that had always been their refuge from the formality of palace life. William sat on the floor with Louis in his lap while George and Charlotte settled on either side of Kate on the sofa. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, casting everything in a golden glow that felt almost cruel in its beauty. William began speaking in a gentle voice, explaining that he had to go away for work, that it was important for many people, that he wished he didn't have to go, but sometimes grown-ups had to do difficult things. George listened with a serious expression far too mature for his years. He asked the questions Kate knew would come. How long? Where? Why? Each answer felt inadequate, each explanation leaving gaps that a child's mind would fill with worry and fear. Charlotte started crying softly, and Kate pulled her close, feeling her own tears threatening to spill over. She had promised herself she would be strong for the children, but watching her daughter's heart break was almost unbearable. William moved closer, wrapping his arms around all of them, creating a circle of warmth and love that they all desperately wanted to preserve forever. Louis, not fully understanding but sensing the sadness, began to cry too, which set off a chain reaction none of them could stop. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, crying together, offering comfort that felt both necessary and insufficient. William whispered promises to each child. He would call them every day. He would write letters just for them. He would be thinking of them always. He would come back as soon as he possibly could. Kate watched him with these children they had created together, and felt her heart breaking in ways she had not known were possible. Later that evening, after the children were finally asleep, Kate found William in his study, surrounded by papers and photographs. He was creating a collection of family pictures to take with him, selecting images that captured their happiest moments. A holiday at the beach where they had all gotten spectacularly sunburned. Christmas morning with wrapping paper scattered everywhere. A quiet afternoon in the garden with the children chasing butterflies. Each photograph was a reminder of what he would be leaving behind. Kate sat beside him, and they went through the photos together, sharing memories attached to each one. "Do you remember when George tried to eat sand?" Do you remember Charlotte's first day of school? Do you remember Louis taking his first steps right here in this room? The memories washed over them in waves, beautiful and painful in equal measure. They were building a bridge between past and future, trying to span the chasm of separation that loomed ahead. The next few days blurred together in a mixture of last-minute preparations and desperate attempts to create final memories. William took each child on individual outings, special time just for them. He took George to see the guards at Buckingham Palace, explaining the importance of duty and service. He had tea with Charlotte at her favorite spot in the palace gardens, listening to her chatter about school and friends. He played endless games with Louis, letting the toddler win and delighting in his giggles. Kate coordinated everything with the efficiency born of necessity rather than desire. She finalized schedules for the children, organized support systems, confirmed arrangements for security and staff. She moved through her tasks with mechanical precision, knowing that if she stopped to think too much about what was coming, she might fall apart completely. Her lady-in-waiting Sophie watched her with concern but knew better than to push. Kate would open up when she was ready or she wouldn't, but either way, she would survive because she had no other choice. The royal family gathered for a private dinner 2 nights before William's departure. His grandmother had insisted, wanting to offer her support and blessing. The Queen had lived through her own separations, her own sacrifices for duty, and understood perhaps better than anyone what William and Kate were facing. She spoke quietly with Kate after dinner, sharing wisdom earned through decades of service. She reminded Kate that strength was not the absence of fear or pain, but the willingness to carry on despite them. William's father pulled him aside for a conversation that left William more emotional than he cared to admit. They had not always had the easiest relationship, but in that moment, father and son connected over the shared understanding of what it meant to put duty before personal happiness. His father spoke about his own regrets, times he had missed with William and Harry because of obligations. He urged William to hold on to every connection with his children, to not let distance create the emotional gaps that were so hard to bridge later. Kate's family came to visit, bringing a different kind of comfort. Her sister Pippa made her laugh despite everything, sharing ridiculous stories and gossip that provided brief respites from the heaviness. Her brother James offered quiet support, a steady presence that asked nothing and gave everything. Her parents held her the way they had when she was a child with scraped knees, as if their love alone could heal this hurt. She let herself be their daughter for a few hours, setting aside the Duchess, the future Queen, and just being Kate. The palace buzzed with preparations. Staff members packed William's belongings with care, ensuring he would have everything he needed. Security teams coordinated logistics and protocols. Communication systems were tested and retested. Everyone was doing their job, but there was an underlying sadness to it all. William was well liked among the staff, and many had worked at the palace long enough to have watched his children grow. This departure felt personal to them too, even if they could never say so directly. Kate tried on the dress she would wear to his departure. It needed to strike the right balance between appropriately formal and emotionally authentic. She stood before the mirror, seeing a woman who looked composed and elegant while inside she felt anything but. She practiced her public smile, the one she would need when cameras captured their goodbye. She rehearsed holding back tears, maintaining dignity, being the image of grace under pressure that the world expected from her. William found her there and stood behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. They did not need words in that moment. Everything they felt, everything they feared, everything they hoped passed between them in a look. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and she leaned into him, both of them memorizing the feeling of being together, whole, complete. Tomorrow would bring the reality they had been dreading, but tonight they still had each other. The morning of departure arrived with a cruelty that felt almost deliberate. The sun rose bright and clear, birds sang in the gardens, and the world seemed determined to be beautiful on a day that felt like an ending. Kate woke before dawn, having barely slept, and found William already awake beside her. They had spent the night holding each other, neither willing to waste precious hours on sleep they could catch later, separately, alone. They moved through their morning routine in silence. Each small action weighted with significance. The last shower together, the last breakfast at their small table, the last time seeing his things scattered around their bedroom. Kate watched William dress in his formal attire, noting how his hands were not quite steady as he fastened his cufflinks. These were the cufflinks she had given him on their first anniversary, a lifetime ago when they could not have imagined this moment. The children were brought to them earlier than usual. George had requested to wake up early to spend more time with his father, a decision that broke Kate's heart with its maturity. Charlotte had barely slept, her nanny reported, and came to them with red eyes and a stuffed rabbit clutched tightly. Louis, too young to fully understand but sensing something monumental, was unusually subdued in William's arms. They had breakfast together as a family one last time. William made silly faces at Louis, trying to coax laughter from his youngest son. He discussed school assignments with George, offering encouragement for a project that William would not be there to see completed. He listened to Charlotte's plans for an upcoming birthday party, promising to send her something special even though he could not attend. Kate watched them, committing every detail to memory, knowing these images would sustain her through the difficult months ahead. The cars began arriving at the palace. Security teams moved into position. Staff members appeared with luggage and documents. The machinery of departure cranked into motion, indifferent to the emotional devastation it was causing. Kate felt a surge of anger at the protocol and procedure, at the way personal tragedy had to be dressed up in formal arrangements and public statements. But she pushed it down, knowing anger would not help anyone, least of all her children who needed her to be steady. They had decided the family would say their private goodbyes before William left, sparing the children the media circus that would surround his actual departure. In their private sitting room, away from cameras and observers, William knelt down to his children's level. He spoke to each one individually, words Kate could not quite hear but could feel in her bones. George nodded seriously, trying to be brave. Charlotte threw her arms around William's neck and would not let go. Louis kissed his father's face repeatedly, saying "Dada" over and over as if the word itself could make him stay. Kate held herself together through sheer force of will as she watched her husband and children cling to each other. She had to be strong because if she fell apart, they all would. She had to be the anchor now, the steady presence that William had always been. When he finally stood, his eyes were wet, and he looked at Kate with an expression that conveyed everything words never could. Love, regret, gratitude, fear, hope. An entire relationship compressed into a single. "Look," the nanny gently ushered the children away, distracting them with promises of activities and treats. Their cries of protest faded as they moved down the hallway, and then it was just William and Kate, standing in a room that suddenly felt enormous and empty despite their presence. They had agreed not to make this goodbye long and drawn out, knowing it would only make things harder. But now that the moment was here, neither could seem to move. William reached for Kate, and she fell into his embrace with a desperation she had kept carefully hidden from their children. Now, with no one watching, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what was happening. Her body shook with sobs she could no longer contain, and William held her tighter, his own tears falling into her hair. They had weathered so much together, but this felt insurmountable, a challenge that might break them despite all their strength and love. He tilted her face up to his, wiping away her tears even as his own continued to fall. They had promised each other so many things over the years, but in this moment, new promises were made. To stay connected despite the distance, to remember what they meant to each other, to hold on to hope when everything felt hopeless, to believe in a future when they would be together again. These were not just words but vows, spoken with the same solemnity as their wedding vows years ago. Their final kiss was not passionate but tender, filled with a sweetness made more profound by its temporary nature. They held each other's faces, memorizing features they knew by heart, but suddenly feared forgetting. The curve of his jaw, the flecks of gold in her eyes, the way his smile started at one corner, the small scar above her eyebrow. Details that were suddenly the most important things in the world. A soft knock at the door signaled that time had run out. They had to let go. They had to step apart. They had to face what came next. Kate straightened William's collar one last time, a gesture both practical and intimate. He touched her cheek one final time, his fingers lingering as if he could take the feeling with him. Then he turned and walked to the door, and she watched him go, knowing that following him would only make the inevitable harder. Kate did not accompany William to his vehicle. They had agreed it was better this way, that the public goodbye should not include her obvious heartbreak. Instead, she watched from a window as he emerged from the palace and walked to the waiting car. Even from a distance, she could see the weight on his shoulders, the way he carried himself with a dignity that must have taken enormous effort. She pressed her hand against the glass, a futile gesture of connection across the growing distance. The media had gathered in controlled areas, cameras capturing every moment of this historic departure. Reporters spoke in hushed, respectful tones, aware that they were witnessing something deeply personal despite its public nature. William acknowledged their presence with a brief wave, then ducked into the car. Kate held her breath, waiting for the moment when the vehicle would pull away and he would truly be gone. As the car began to move, Kate allowed herself one moment of complete vulnerability. She closed her eyes and let the tears flow freely, no longer trying to maintain composure or strength. In this private moment, she could be just a wife watching her husband leave, not a duchess or a future queen. She could grieve without apology, feel without restraint, hurt without pretense. The sound of the car fading into the distance felt like a physical pain. Kate opened her eyes to see the empty courtyard, the space where William had stood now vacant. Behind her, she heard the soft footsteps of her children returning, brought back by the nanny who understood they would need their mother now more than ever. Kate took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and turned from the window. Her private grief would have to wait. Her children needed her, and she would not fail them, no matter how broken she felt inside. The first week without William felt like moving through water. Everything took more effort than it should. Simple tasks became mountainous challenges. Kate woke each morning to the cruel reminder of an empty space beside her, the sheets cold where warmth should have been. She forced herself out of bed because the children needed breakfast, needed routine, needed a mother who functioned even when her heart felt shattered. George had become unnaturally quiet, retreating into himself in a way that worried Kate deeply. He threw himself into his schoolwork with an intensity that seemed more like escape than dedication. When she tried to talk to him, he assured her he was fine with a practiced smile that reminded her painfully of William's public face. She recognized the armor he was building around himself, the same armor she wore every time she stepped outside their private quarters. Charlotte oscillated between anger and sadness, lashing out one moment and collapsing in tears the next. She refused to sleep in her own room, appearing at Kate's door each night with her pillow and blanket, climbing into the too-big bed that felt too empty. Kate never turned her away. They would curl up together, sometimes talking, sometimes crying, sometimes just existing in shared grief. In these dark hours, Kate found an unexpected connection with her daughter, their pain creating a bridge of understanding. Louis asked for his father constantly. "Where Dada?" became a refrain that punctured Kate's composure every single time. She explained over and over in simple terms that Daddy was working far away, that he loved Louis very much, that he would come back. But toddler logic could not grasp absence, could not understand why someone who loved you would choose to be gone. Each time Louis asked, Kate felt the question like a knife. The palace staff tried to help in whatever ways they could. Mrs. Henderson kept fresh flowers in every room. Silent bursts of color meant to lift spirits. The chef prepared Kate's favorite meals that went largely untouched. The nanny took extra shifts, giving Kate space to breathe when the children became overwhelming. But there was a limit to what anyone could do. No amount of service could fill the void William had left behind. William had promised to call every day, and he kept that promise religiously. The calls came at odd hours due to time differences, crackling connections that made his voice sound distant and unreal. He spoke first with the children, asking about their days, telling them he loved them, making promises about when he returned. Kate would watch them light up at the sound of his voice, only to see them deflate when the call ended and reality crashed back in. Then it would be Kate's turn, and they would try to have conversations that felt normal. She told him about the children's activities, about palace matters that needed decisions, about the weather in the garden and anything except how much she was struggling. He told her about his work in careful, vague terms, about missing them, about counting down the days until he could come home. What they did not talk about was the loneliness, the fear, the question of whether distance was creating gaps they would not be able to bridge. Kate threw herself into her royal duties with renewed vigor, filling every possible hour with engagements and appearances. If she stayed busy enough, she did not have time to think, to feel, to break down. She visited hospitals and schools, met with charities and organizations, smiled for cameras and made small talk with strangers. The public saw a duchess who was graceful and composed, managing beautifully in her husband's absence. They could not see the woman who cried in the car between appointments, who took anxiety medication before public events, who felt like she was barely holding herself together. The media coverage of William's mission was extensive but carefully controlled. Kate found herself searching for glimpses of him in news reports, pausing on photographs just to see his face. It was absurd, she thought, to miss someone so desperately while being able to see images of them, to hear their voice but not feel their presence. Technology created an illusion of connection that somehow made the actual separation feel worse. Letters began arriving from William, handwritten pages that Kate read and reread until the paper wore soft. He wrote about missing the small things, morning coffee together, her laugh at his terrible jokes, the way she hummed while getting ready. He wrote about the children, asking for details she had already shared on phone calls but wanting to hear again. He wrote about the future, painting pictures of their reunion, of the life they would return to when this was over. Kate kept every letter in a box beside her bed, tangible proof that this separation was not permanent, that there was an end date even if it felt impossibly far away. She wrote back with equal frequency, filling pages with observations and thoughts she could not articulate over scratchy phone connections. She wrote about the children's growth, the way George was becoming more serious, Charlotte more thoughtful, Louis more articulate. She wrote about the garden blooming without him there to see it, about changes in the palace routines, about small absurdities that made her think of him. She wrote about missing him but tried to keep the tone light, not wanting to burden him with the depth of her loneliness. Friends rallied around Kate in ways that helped and sometimes hindered. They invited her to lunches and dinners, trying to distract her with social activities. They called to check in, sent thoughtful gifts, offered to help with the children. Kate appreciated the gestures but found herself pulling away. Unable to explain, that company often made her feel more alone. In a room full of people, she was still the only one missing William in exactly this way. Still the only one counting down to a reunion only she truly understood. Her mother became a lifeline, visiting regularly and knowing when to talk and when to simply sit in companionable silence. She had wisdom earned from her own marriage, her own challenges, and she shared it carefully, never pushing but always available. She reminded Kate that strength was not about never falling apart, but about getting back up afterward. She watched the children when Kate needed to escape for a few hours, providing normalcy and love without judgment or expectation. The nights were the hardest. During the day, Kate could maintain her composure, could function and manage and perform. But night stripped away all her defenses. She lay in their bed surrounded by evidence of their shared life, and felt the loss so acutely it was almost physical pain. She wore one of William's shirts to sleep, clinging to the fading scent of him, knowing it was pathetic but unable to care. In the darkness, she allowed herself to feel everything she suppressed during daylight hours. Kate began keeping a journal, writing down everything she wanted to tell William, but could not find words for during their brief calls. She wrote about her fears for their children, her anger at the circumstances that had torn them apart, her guilt over the times she resented his absence even though she knew it was not his choice. She wrote about loving him so much it hurt, about the way absence had made her realize how completely he had become part of her identity. The journal became a repository for her authentic self, the Kate she could not show anyone else. George's school held a father-son event that Kate had to attend alone. She watched her son put on a brave face as other boys arrived with their fathers, saw the moment his composure cracked, pulled him close when he finally allowed himself to cry. She explained again about duty and service, about how sometimes the right thing was also the hard thing. But her words felt empty against his pain. That night she called William and let him hear her anger, her frustration at a system that demanded such sacrifices from children who had not chosen this life. The months dragged on with a monotony that felt both endless and surreal. Kate marked time by the children's milestones William was missing. Louis's birthday came and went with a party that felt hollow despite the decorations and cake. William had arranged for a special video message, his face appearing on screen to sing happy birthday, but it was not the same as having him there. Louis kept looking around, confused about where the voice was coming from, asking if Dada was hiding somewhere in the palace. Charlotte lost her first tooth, a momentous occasion that should have been celebrated with both parents present. She carefully placed the tiny tooth under her pillow, and Kate played Tooth Fairy with a heavy heart, knowing William would have made it into an elaborate production. The next morning, Charlotte's excitement was dampened by the immediate wish to tell her father. They called him right away, disrupting his schedule, but William stayed on the line for 20 minutes to hear every detail of how the tooth fell out during breakfast. George received an award at school for his academic achievements, and Kate sat in the audience alone, clapping and cheering while feeling William's absence like a physical weight. She took photos and videos to share, but they felt like poor substitutes for actual presence. That night, George confided that the award did not feel as good because his father was not there to see him receive it. Kate held him and promised that William was proud. That distance did not diminish how much his father loved him, but she could see the doubt in her son's eyes. The palace routine continued around Kate, indifferent to personal suffering. There were meetings to attend, events to host, decisions to make. She signed documents, approved schedules, met with staff, all while feeling like she was operating on autopilot. People told her she was doing wonderfully, managing the household with grace and efficiency. She wanted to scream that she was not wonderful, that she was barely surviving, that every day felt like an endurance test she was not sure she would pass. Kate found unexpected comfort in connecting with other people facing similar separations. She visited military families, listening to their stories of deployment and distance. She met with diplomatic spouses who understood the peculiar pain of duty-driven separations. These conversations reminded her that she was not unique in her suffering, that countless others had walked this path and survived. Their strength inspired her, gave her hope that she too would make it through. A crisis arose in the middle of the night when Charlotte spiked a high fever. Kate spent hours holding her daughter, sponging her forehead with cool cloths, monitoring her temperature with growing concern. The palace physician was called, and while he assured Kate it was likely just a virus, the fear was overwhelming. She wanted William there with a desperation that felt primal. She needed him to tell her it would be okay, to share the burden of worry, to simply be present in the crisis. She called him in the middle of his workday, and he dropped everything to talk her through it. His calm voice steadied her, reminded her that she was capable, that Charlotte would be fine. But when the call ended and Kate was once again alone with a sick child, she felt the distance between them more acutely than ever. This was what she had been most afraid of, facing a genuine emergency without her partner, and it was every bit as awful as she had imagined. Charlotte recovered within days, but the experience left Kate shaken. She realized how much she had been depending on the fantasy that everything would be manageable, that she could handle whatever came up until William returned. The illness had shattered that illusion, revealed how vulnerable they all were, how much they needed him for more than just emotional comfort. She did not share these fears with William because what good would it do to make him feel more guilty when he could not change the situation? Letters from William became both a blessing and a curse. Kate treasured each one, but they also made his absence more tangible. Reading his words, she could hear his voice in her head, could picture his face as he wrote. It created moments of intense connection followed by crashes of reality when she looked up and he was not there. She wondered if it would have been easier to have less contact, to not have these constant reminders of what she was missing, but she could not bring herself to wish away their lifeline. The children began acting out in different ways as the separation stretched on. George became defiant, challenging Kate's authority in ways he never had before. Charlotte grew clingy and anxious, afraid to let Kate out of her sight. Louis's sleep regressed, waking multiple times each night crying for his father. Kate handled each challenge with as much patience as she could muster. But there were days she felt completely overwhelmed, days she locked herself in the bathroom just to cry for 5 minutes before facing her children again. Kate's own health began to suffer from the stress. She lost weight. Dark circles appeared under her eyes no amount of concealer could hide. Her lady-in-waiting gently suggested she see a doctor, but Kate refused, knowing there was no medical solution for heartache. She forced herself to eat for the children's sake, to sleep when exhaustion made functioning impossible, to maintain the basic self-care that kept her from completely falling apart. Spring turned to summer, and the garden bloomed in riots of color that Kate found both beautiful and painful. She remembered planting many of these flowers with William, planning what would bloom when, imagining future seasons they would enjoy together. Now she walked among them alone, their beauty a reminder of what she was missing. She took photos to send him but struggled to find words to capture how lonely it felt to experience beauty without him there to share it. A surprise package arrived from William, carefully planned months in advance. Inside were gifts for each family member, letters explaining the thought behind each present. For Kate, there was a locket containing a photo of their family, something she could wear close to her heart. She put it on immediately and found herself touching it throughout the day, a talisman against loneliness. The gesture was so thoughtful, so perfectly William, that it made her miss him even more intensely. The children's activities continued with relentless normalcy. There were sports practices and music lessons, birthday parties and school projects. Kate showed up for everything, playing both parents, taking twice as many photos, trying to be enough for 3 people. She was exhausted by the effort of maintaining enthusiasm and energy. But she refused to let her children miss out on life just because their father was not there to share it with them. Kate had a conversation with the Queen that changed her perspective slightly. Her grandmother-in-law spoke about the sacrifices inherent in royal life, about the generations who had faced similar challenges, about the importance of duty, even when it demanded everything. But she also spoke about the importance of acknowledging pain, of not pretending that duty made sacrifice less costly. She gave Kate permission to struggle, to not be perfect, to simply survive rather than thrive during this difficult time. News began to circulate that William's mission was progressing well, that his work was making a real difference. Kate felt proud and resentful in equal measures, proud that his sacrifice was meaningful, that he was accomplishing important things, resentful that important things had required him to leave, that the world's needs had superseded their family's needs. She hated feeling this resentment, knew it was not fair but could not seem to escape it. The children asked constantly when their father was coming home. Kate gave vague answers because she did not have concrete information, because missions like this were unpredictable, because she could not bear to give them a date and then have it change. She promised he would return, that the separation would end, but her promises felt increasingly hollow as weeks turned into months with no definite end in sight. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, while Kate was reviewing household accounts, trying to focus on numbers that blurred together. When she saw William's name on the screen at an unusual time, her heart leapt with both hope and fear. Good news or bad news, nothing else would prompt a call outside their scheduled times. Her hands trembled slightly as she answered, and his first words changed everything. He was coming home. The mission was complete, successful beyond expectations. He would be returning within the week. Kate felt the words wash over her, struggled to process them as real rather than another daydream she had entertained countless times. She asked him to repeat himself, needed to hear it again to believe it. When he did, laughing at her shock, she started crying. Months of held tension releasing in a flood of tears that were joy and relief and disbelief all mixed together. She wanted to tell the children immediately, but William asked her to wait, wanting to tell them together on their next scheduled call. Those hours of keeping the secret felt impossible, but Kate managed it, not wanting to deny William the joy of seeing their faces when they learned he was coming back. When the call finally came and William told them, the children's reactions were everything Kate had hoped for. George's careful composure shattered into pure happiness. Charlotte screamed with delight, jumping up and down. Louis did not fully understand but caught the excitement, clapping his hands and laughing. The palace staff received the news with barely concealed relief. They had watched Kate struggle through these months, had seen the toll on the family, and they shared in the joy of William's return. Mrs. Henderson immediately began planning, asking about favorite meals and preferences. The household manager started coordinating schedules. Even the usually reserved security team seemed lighter, smiling more readily. The entire palace felt different, as if someone had opened windows and let fresh air sweep through stale rooms. Kate found herself unable to sit still, energy coursing through her after months of exhaustion. She walked through the palace, touching things William had touched, imagining him back in these spaces. She went through his closet, considering whether to unpack things or leave them as they were. She changed the sheets on their bed 3 times, wanting everything perfect. She was behaving irrationally and she knew it, but after months of simply enduring, she wanted to do something, anything, to prepare for his return. The children became a whirlwind of excitement and activity. George made a welcome home banner with meticulous care, measuring to ensure the letters were perfectly spaced. Charlotte drew picture after picture to show her father, narrating all the things she would tell him the moment he arrived. Louis suddenly started talking about Dada non-stop, as if saying the word enough times would make him appear faster. Kate let them be excited even when it made bedtime nearly impossible, because their joy was healing something in all of them. Kate spent hours planning what she would say when she saw William, composing speeches in her head that ranged from heartfelt declarations to angry rants about the pain of separation. But she knew that when the moment came, words would fail her completely. Some things were too big for language, too complex for neat sentences. She would have to trust that he would understand everything she could not articulate, just as she hoped to understand everything he had gone through. The night before William's return, Kate lay awake replaying their goodbye. She thought about how naive she had been then about what the separation would entail, how she had not truly understood the depth of loneliness she would experience. She thought about the person she had been that day versus who she was now. She felt fundamentally changed by these months, tested in ways she had not anticipated. She hoped William had not changed too much. That distance had not altered him in ways that would create new divides between them. Morning arrived with excruciating slowness. Kate helped the children dress in their best clothes, combed hair and straightened collars with shaking hands. They were going to meet William as he arrived, a private moment before he had to face the inevitable media attention. The palace had arranged everything perfectly, but Kate barely registered the details. All she could think about was seeing him, touching him, confirming that this was real and not another vivid dream. The drive to meet him felt eternal. The children asked repeatedly how much longer, their excitement making patience impossible. Kate answered automatically while her mind raced through every possible scenario. What if things felt different? What if months apart had created a distance they could not bridge? What if the reunion was awkward rather than joyful? She told herself these fears were ridiculous, but they persisted nonetheless. When the car finally arrived at the private location where William would meet them, Kate's heart pounded so hard she felt dizzy. She helped the children out of the vehicle, straightened George's collar one more time, smoothed Charlotte's hair, adjusted Louis on her hip. Then she looked up and there he was, stepping out of another vehicle, and the world seemed to stop spinning. He looked thinner, tired, older somehow. But his eyes found hers immediately, and in them she saw everything she had been afraid of not finding: love, recognition, relief. He dropped his bag and opened his arms, and the children ran to him, colliding with his legs in a tangle of hugs and tears. He knelt down, pulling them all close, and Kate could hear him saying their names over and over like a prayer. Then he looked up at her, still kneeling with their children in his arms, and the expression on his face broke something open in Kate's chest. She walked toward them, not running but moving with purpose, and as she reached them, William stood, still holding Louis, and extended one arm to her. She stepped into the embrace, and suddenly they were all together, a circle of four that had been broken and was now whole again. They stood like that for a long time, no one wanting to be the first to pull away. William kissed each child's head, then found Kate's lips in a kiss that tasted of salt and relief. The children chattered excitedly, all trying to talk at once, telling him everything they had saved up to share. He listened to all of them, his attention divided but genuine, one hand never leaving Kate's back, as if he needed the constant physical reassurance that she was really there. Eventually they had to separate, had to move toward the vehicles that would take them home, but the desperation was gone, replaced with the solid reality of reunion. They talked over each other during the drive back, voices overlapping in joyful chaos. Kate held William's hand tightly, still not quite believing he was really there beside her. She caught him looking at her several times, his own disbelief mirroring hers. Back at the palace, they went straight to their private quarters, ignoring protocol and schedules. The children wanted to show William everything at once, pulling him in different directions. He went along with their chaos, clearly delighted to be overwhelmed by normal family life after months of formal duty. Kate watched from the doorway, her heart so full it hurt, as her family was together again in the space where they belonged. That night, after the children were finally asleep, exhausted by excitement, William and Kate sat together in their bedroom. They did not say much at first, just held each other, relearning the feel of being together. When they did talk, it was about small things, ordinary things, the kind of mundane conversation they had been unable to have over crackling phone lines. Kate told him about the garden, about Mrs. Henderson's new assistant, about Louis's new favorite song. William told her about missing tea at the right temperature, about dreaming of her voice, about counting down days like a prisoner marking time. They also talked about the hard parts, about how the separation had affected them individually and as a family. William expressed guilt about the burden Kate had carried alone. Kate admitted her resentment even while understanding the necessity. They acknowledged that recovery would take time, that the children would need help processing what they had been through, that they themselves would need to reconnect and rebuild. But they also affirmed their commitment, their love, their determination to move forward together. As Kate finally drifted toward sleep, wrapped in William's arms in their own bed, she reflected on what she had learned during their separation. She had discovered depths of strength she had not known she possessed. She had learned that love could survive distance, that connections could be maintained across time zones and obstacles. She had learned that duty and personal happiness were not always compatible, but that neither had to completely destroy the other. Most importantly, she had learned that coming home was not just about returning to a place, but about returning to the people who made that place matter. The separation had been devastating, but surviving it had taught them all something valuable about resilience and love and the strength of their family bond. They had been tested and had not broken, though they had certainly bent. Now reunited, they had the chance to rebuild something even stronger from what had been strained but not severed. The tears and goodbyes had captivated the world, but this quiet reunion, this private returning, was theirs alone to treasure.